So today you're reading an excerpt from Hot Earl Summer, which is the next book in the Wild Winchesters. So for any readers who haven't yet caught up on the series, can you give a quick pitch on what they're missing out on?
Sure. So this is a very fun series, if I do say so myself, because we've got this wild family of caper committing siblings. What that means is if you've ever seen the TV show Leverage or heard of superheroes, they've got kind of a Robin Hood vibe. So they're out fighting for justice, whatever it takes. And there's heists in every book, lots of banter and shenanigans. And it has been a blast to write. And I hope you have a lot of fun reading them as well.
It is a really fun series. And it is, like you said, like they're after justice and it's kind of found family vibe. So it's a lot of fun. Go read it. But first, hear this excerpt from Hot Earl Summer, which is coming out in 2024. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so here's the blurb. No one's ever heard this yet before because this is an excerpt of a book that hasn't been released. Bold, curvy Elizabeth Wynchester loves cuddling hedgehogs almost as much as she adores vanquishing villains with the sharp blade concealed inside her cane. Despite others' opinions about her body and gender, nothing will stop her from seeing justice done. When her next mission drops her at the dastardly Earl of Densmore's castle, she is prepared to duel like gentlemen, only to be locked inside. Her trusty sword cannot defeat the castle's hidden traps or protect her heart from the devilishly handsome rogue guarding the keep. When reclusive inventor Stephen Lenox agreed to impersonate his cousin for a few days, he did not expect the Earl to vanish altogether. Nor could Stephen predict mounting death threats or the arrival of a beguiling, blade wielding spinster who declares herself his new bodyguard. As the Earl's enemies lay siege to the castle, Stephen fights his way past Elizabeth's defenses. She will share his bed, but when the adventure concludes, she vows to sever their affair, unless he can somehow convince a swashbuckling siren to surrender her heart. I'm very excited for this, so I'll let you take it away, Erica.
Thank you so much. This was a lot of fun to write. Elizabeth is so swashbuckly, and Stephen is this hilarious tinker. So he makes these Rube Goldberg devices. So he has filled this castle with booby traps, essentially, like think Goonies. There's machines everywhere and leads to a lot of fun. So here is a scene where they lay eyes on each other for the first time.
Mm.
Another day, another batch of ominous correspondence. With a sigh, Stephen opened the newest missive from Richard Reddington. Did sons of viscounts truly have nothing else to do all day but scribble increasingly bloodthirsty threats to the Earl next door? Stephen skimmed the letter. Reddington was demanding immediate occupancy of Castle Harborough grounds. Consider this your official warning, Stephen read aloud. We're watching you. If you fail to hand over that deed, Mr. Reddington shall assume control by force, even if it means laying siege on his own castle. Oh, for the love of God. Stephen wouldn't fall for that. No spoiled lordling was choleric enough to storm his own castle. We're watching you, Stephen repeated in aristocratic accents. Of all the idle, idiotic threats, Reddington's country estate did adjoin the castle property, but a dense strip of woods stretched between them. Reddington could station a man at every window of his resplendent manor, and at best, all he would see were 3 acres of trees. Nonetheless, the sinister tone was unsettling enough that Stephen dropped to the stone floor for a round of press-up exercises. His anxious thoughts tended to ping and flail and spiral like the complex machines he put together. Concentrating on the flexing of his muscles and the breaths in his lungs calmed the noise and helped Stephen to think. He was angry, was the problem. Angry with his flighty cousin for losing a castle he didn't own in a card game. He was also vexed with himself for being hoodwinked into this ruse to begin with. Nonetheless, Stephen was undeniably a better Earl than the Earl. In addition to settling accounts and making profitable investments and overseeing improvements on the various entailed properties, Stephen had also gone ahead and given every member of staff a rise in wages. After which, boredom had threatened, which was why Stephen had turned this castle into his laboratory away from home. He missed his books and his bed and his devices. Even though there were more staff in Castle Harbrook, the building somehow felt emptier and lonelier. A bold claim from a man so lonely, he spent every waking moment filling the emptiness in his life with machine after machine. Nonetheless, Stephen would defend this castle to the best of his considerable ability. Richard Reddington would not cross Castle Harbrook's threshold without Stephen's knowledge and authorization. No one would. Bells clanged overhead. Stephen jerked his head up to stare at them. Those bells were part of an early warning system he'd installed to ring when the property line had been crossed. Had the hidden archer been replaced with an even bolder attack? Stephen kept telescopes in all four of the castle's corner turrets, but those bells specifically signaled that a vehicle had arrived on the northern side, facing the street. It wasn't a delivery. The most recent shipment had come in yesterday, and the next wouldn't arrive until tomorrow. He hurried to the stone windows. A cross breeze flowed through the large rectangular openings on all four sides of the cylindrical turret. Ducking so that he could not be seen, Stephen pressed one eye to the telescope. A humble pony cart trudged into view. It was an ordinary country gig. Simple, mud-splattered. The pony lumbering up the private road was just as unassuming. Brown, short of stature, a general air of boredom with its task. Inside the gig was a long, thin crate and a woman whose visage was hidden beneath an enormous, wide-brimmed bonnet. He could not guess her age without a glimpse of her face, but one daintily gloved hand clutched the handle of a stout wooden cane. The beast drew to a stop. The woman climbed out of the gig with obvious gingerness, as though the ride up the hill had been exactly as arduous an experience as the pony cart's appearance implied. The wind whipped her dress against her body, revealing plump curves. Stephen changed his mind about being able to guess her age. The morning gown was of fine quality and tailored to flatter the woman's voluptuous shape. This was a young lady, walking like an old woman. Fashionable, but unchaperoned. Moneyed, but riding an absolute turnip of a pony cart. Stephen was certain of his conclusions, yet they did not sum up to anything he could compute. The more he watched the woman, the less he understood. Was she here to sell him something? She left her crate in the gig, and the gig untethered. The pony, for its part, seemed content to gnaw at the tall green grass, of which there was plenty. The grounds were covered in flowers and greenery for the pony's pleasure. Another gust of wind rose from the west, sending the brim of the woman's bonnet flying up away from her face. Just for a second. It was enough. Stephen swallowed hard. He had no idea who this woman was, but she was extraordinarily beautiful. A missionary, perhaps, here to chastise the Earl for failing to attend church on Sunday, again. Perhaps the crate was full of Bibles. He tilted his telescope to keep her in sight. The woman glanced around the door for the knocker. Stephen had removed it months ago to make the entrance less welcoming. She made a fist with her free-gloved hand and banged on the door with that. He would never have heard it, were it not for another system he'd installed to carry sound up through narrow tunnels he'd bored into reinforced stone walls. Surely Densmore wouldn't mind, in order to eavesdrop on any enemies who might approach. Stephen called it a whispering wall because it transmitted the slightest sound. The visitor banged again, louder. Stephen did not respond to her call. Neither did the servants. Before the Earl abandoned his castle and its occupants, he had instructed his staff just as firmly as he'd lectured Stephen. Let no one in. Undaunted, the woman lifted her cane and used that to rap against the castle's thick oak door. This could be heard with or without the aid of any listening contraptions. Its racket also went unanswered. "I know you're in there," she called up. "I can see smoke from your kitchen." Stephen fought the urge to yell back, "Your logic is unsound. Smoke from the kitchen means someone is at home, but it doesn't mean that I am." For one, this rejoinder would give away his position. For two, perhaps she was here to visit one of the scullery maids. He was certain this visitor wasn't here for the Earl of Densmore. No man with half a brain would leave a woman this beautiful behind. She rapped again with the heavy cane. "Please," she pleaded, "I've come from so far. Take pity on a weary traveler. I beg you." Stephen could not help but feel sorry for her predicament. She seemed harmless and nice enough, but rules were rules for a reason. If he let her in just because she was pretty and carried a cane, who knew what would be next? An army of missionaries with 5 carts worth of Bibles? She rapped one last time, then heaved a breath. Silence stretched around the castle. Even the wind stilled and the birds silenced, and the tree leaves ceased to rustle. No one was answering her plea. Not even nature itself stirred. "Have it your way," she muttered. Stephen heard the words as clearly as if the fetching visitor were whispering against the back of his neck. "Beth the Berserker it is." He blinked. Perhaps he had not heard her clearly. It had sounded as though she'd said. The woman marched toward the pony cart with her cane held high, like a field commander leading a platoon of marching soldiers into battle. She handed a bit of carrot to the pony, then tossed her cane inside the gig and ripped off her dainty gloves. With her bare hands, she wrenched open the wooden crate. From in its depths, she withdrew 2 enormous battle axes. Stephen stared in disbelief as the woman raised each into the air. Beneath the feminine poofs at her shoulders, muscles visibly flexed in what had previously seemed to be deceptively soft flesh. Axes held high, she marched back to the front door without slowing her pace or panting for breath. She looked like a Valkyrie descending upon a battlefield. Who was this woman? The latest intimidation tactic by Richard Reddington? Was the archer not enough? "Tell Reddington I'm not to be bothered," Stephen called out through the window. The woman jerked her gaze up to the turret, her previously pretty face a twisted mask of fury. "How dare you imply I hold any affiliation with that scoundrel?" Interesting. Before Stephen could apologize for his erroneous assumption, the woman let out a primal scream, ear-splitting enough to break glass, then began striking at the 10-inch thick oak door with enough force to rattle the iron hinges. There was no chance of anyone cutting through wood that impenetrable with an ordinary blade. Or, perhaps, Stephen amended, there was no chance of anyone ordinary doing so. Beth the Berserker was anything but ordinary. 5 minutes later, neither the screaming nor the thrashing showed any signs of slowing. As the woman struck at the door with her axes, shards of wood flew up at all angles, spraying the air around her as though she were caught inside a dust storm. He either had to get rid of her, which seemed unlikely, or allow her in, which was forbidden. Then again, at this rate, Stephen wouldn't need to allow anything. It might take Miss Berserker 3 days of frenzied chopping, but one way or another, this woman was slashing and hacking her way into the castle. "Very well," Stephen murmured. "Have it your way." He rose to his feet and pressed a lever.